My name's Kent Tonkin. I'm originally from Fallen Timber. I live in Lilly, and I work at St. Francis University, and I think alternative and green energy is a path to a sustainable, ethical, and financially rewarding future where this country could be creating jobs and exporting product rather than the other way around. My landlord and I, 2 years ago, engaged in the process of recycling used cooking grease and converting it into heating fuel for our homes. This was several years back. My landlord and I actually were talking about the idea of doing something with renewable energy to heat our homes. And Tom had actually come to me with the idea of biodiesel. He asked me if I had ever heard of it. And I said, yeah, I had, and I was interested to see what his perception was. And he offered me a zero-risk chance to get on to the idea of using biodiesel because he was my landlord responsible for the upkeep of my heating system. I could try the biodiesel idea with him at no risk to myself because if something went wrong with the equipment, he was prepared to fix it. Well, we were really fortunate to have a very renewable source of used grease here at St. Francis. I talked to the dining hall, and they were putting out about 25 to 30 gallons of used cooking grease a week. And this stuff was being picked up by a removal service and probably ending up in a landfill because it was waste. And from the exploration that Tom and I had done, because the grease itself has very similar properties to diesel fuel, it could be burned in a home furnace. There was a process we had to go through that involved a centrifuge and the use of some unfortunately caustic chemicals to separate the solid part of the grease, which is called glycerin, from the liquid part of basically corn oil. And once that process was complete and those components were separated, you could essentially burn the leftover product, the corn oil, in your diesel engine or in your furnace. So that's what we were doing. Based on the chemicals and the supplies, not counting the elbow grease, no pun intended, it cost about 60 cents a gallon to make heating fuel. And at the time, I think heating fuel itself was going for $2.50 or $3 a gallon. The project was not without its road bumps. To be blunt, neither one of us were heating engineers nor chemical engineers. We had to do a lot of trial and error with the airflow settings on the furnace. As it turns out, biodiesel, at least what we're referring to as biodiesel, burns hotter and requires less air to combust. So it's actually more efficient in addition to putting less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we had a real problem trying to get the furnace set to a proper point, and there were times the furnace would shut off, and I'd have to call my landlord, but he was willing to do this because it was part of the experiment. The other problem we ran into is if you put too much airflow into a furnace, you could start the fuel smoldering. And when the fuel would smolder, of course, you could get smoke all through the building and that sort of thing, which was an undesirable outcome as well. We did this for about 2 years, and the reason we stopped, honestly, was it got to be kind of a nuisance to have big vats of used cooking grease in my landlord's garage. That being said, as soon as I gave up my source of raw material, somebody else took it up, so somebody else around is using Torbion's used cooking grease. And if you go to any fast food joint in the area, it's very hard to find a stable, reliable source of used cooking grease now because everybody's swiping it up and using this. And in fact, if you ever get behind a diesel car or a truck and you smell French fries, it's probably somebody who's burning diesel fuel, or biodiesel rather. If you're not wearing gloves and taking safety precautions, you could get hurt. It's not something I think that people should engage in lightly.
Okay, why did you want to do it?
There were a couple reasons. I always thought that the idea of renewable energy made a lot of sense, and the thing that always really made me crazy was I never saw it as a partisan issue. I've never understood why it's been a political issue to have renewable energy. It just makes sense. It makes sense in the environmental aspect that you're keeping raw materials out of landfills, that you're reusing things that have already been processed rather than drilling into. I mean, we're seeing the effects of offshore drilling now, and the positive and negative aspects we have as a source of energy. We also have a well that's been going for over 60 days. It can't be plugged. So the idea of being environmentally conscious, but also the idea of being fiscally conscious. As somebody who was paying $3 to $4 a gallon for heating oil, the idea of making it for a fraction of the price and doing it in an ethical manner had appeal across the board.